Hi, this is the fellow passenger. If you clicked on this video because you were interested in the big sample bank that I'm releasing today, rather than hearing me reminiscing, I suggest that you check out the link in the description where you can jump straight to my Patreon page, where you will be able to grab the new 3.3 gigabyte sample pack with samples that you can use at your own leisure. The big difference between this sample pack and the other ones that I've released in past years is that I'm using a lot more hardware. It's not exclusively hardware, but I will talk a bit more about the sample pack itself later in this video. So if you want to stay tuned and hear me reminisce and ponder about YouTube musicianship, etc., then please stay. Why haven't I posted any videos for a while? Some of you have asked, and that's very kind of you. I think there are quite a few reasons for that. One being that I have been working on the studio itself for a fair bit. I feel it's almost done now. As far as the studio can be done, I'm sure I will be changing things moving forward too, but there's a couple of things I would like to do. As part of that, I've also wanted to document that a lot more and talk about some of the equipment that I have in my studio, what has made a big difference to me and what not so much, and how I now perhaps incorporate the hardware much more in a different way than I used to, especially since Ableton has really improved when it comes to latency and much easier to mix and match hardware and software. But it's been difficult in many ways. Filming. I now got a bunch of, what should we call them, clamps and things, allowing me to mount a bunch of old mobile phones, as well as I got one decent camera. But it feels laborious, and I'm also not quite sure what to say. How can I add anything to this enormous stream of new content that appears on YouTube? That also made me reflect on, am I a YouTube musician? I suppose I am. When it comes to music making, I think my channel is quite small, but I think probably more people have come across my musicianship through my YouTube channel rather than anything else. That also made me reflect on other musicians that are heavily featured on YouTube. Many that I have been inspired by. Really niche ones, but also sometimes I have learned a lot from some of the really big ones like Mr. Bill and Andrew Huang, etc. But they are not musicians that I would otherwise listen to. They have releases on Spotify or whatever, but it's not something that I would ever cross my mind to put on. I think looking at someone making music on YouTube has become a new way of enjoying music, that you see the process of it being made rather than that it is a recording or something that you see live. I also think that it's interesting from an electronic music point of view, because when you see someone performing electronic music on stage, it is quite difficult to see what they are doing, and to make it an entertaining show, a lot of other audiovisual tricks are obviously used. But on YouTube, you actually get to see those parts where talent happens. It's different when you see a violinist on a stage. It's not hard to imagine that what they are doing may be quite a skill. But with electronic music, you often don't see like, are they just checking Facebook on their computer or whatever, or are they actually doing something? But I also think, especially with electronic music, the skill often happens in the studio, and that is a process that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get a glimpse into. I also think there is a difference between what YouTube musicians do. I think the ones that I enjoy the most is the ones that inspire me musically in terms of what they're doing. So, as an example, I find there is quite a lot of YouTube videos out there where someone is comparing an oscillator to a vintage oscillator. I don't find that as inspiring as someone who takes a piece of equipment and do creative things with it. And it doesn't necessarily have to end up as a finished piece of music. And it is a completely different way of consuming music, as I mentioned. But who do I want to be in all this? Do I mind? I definitely don't want to be the person comparing oscillators. I also don't think I would ever want to be the hardware review person. Having said that, I could potentially review a piece of equipment if it is something that allows me to do something inspiring that I want to share. But it wouldn't be the generic, oh, I have a piece of equipment and I'm just going to tell you what it does. I don't think that is the person that I would like to be. But where does the music come from that I make? Or rather, why do I make music? A couple of months ago or so, a local friend who's a singer-songwriter asked me about where the inspiration for the music come from. Almost thinking so she plays acoustic guitar and she sings, and she said that the reason why she's doing this is because she has something that she wants to express, but she finds it difficult to say it, and the medium of music allows her to communicate those things. And she asked me if I did agree to that, and if that's the reason why I make music. And that made me reflect on that, and for me, I don't think it's that at all. It's not as if something I have inside of me that I want to communicate to the world around me. It is much more to do with exploration. I could wake up one morning and think about an idea and wonder what's going to happen. What happens if I'm going to connect this to that? Or what happens if I modulate this with that? What's the outcome going to be? I think it's more exploring new territory. New territory to me that inspires me to make music. But what is new territory? I've been thinking about the reason when I sit down and make something, I often find myself being inspired by other music. And I think that's probably quite common. And more recently, I have been perhaps looking a bit closer at old Detroit electro. Well, not only Detroit, also European electro. It's not something that is new to me. I've been listening to it for a very long time, but for some reason I decided to study it a bit closer. And I get to a point where I can make something that sounds like electro, and it sounds convincing, and it sounds like it could be part of that sound palette. But if you take a step back and think about the people who made that in the first place, I feel that they were not necessarily trying to mimic something existing. they were surely getting inspiration from existing artists. If you take something like Kraftwerk, which someone was describing as proto-electro, for example, but they took that and made it into something new rather than just trying to be someone that sounds like Kraftwerk. I think that is potentially much more interesting, that way of thinking. And taking that one step further, a couple of weeks ago I spoke to someone who has trained as a composer in classical music, and he was talking about this method that he's using, that when he wants to portray something, some sort of emotion, and before he sits down and writes any notes down, he writes like a graph of how the whole, what shall we call it, sound story plays out, with tension and release and build up, almost like a dramatical curve that you would use in film or theater, and trying to just abstractly illustrate the different parts and then trying to recreate those feelings with sound, as in like composition using the classical sound palette, rather than sitting down and saying like, I'm really inspired by Debussy, I'm going to make a Debussy style track. I feel like maybe that type of exploration is going to become very interesting for me. It's something that I definitely am going to start exploring, and hopefully we will see what I find during next year. So still holding on to that aspect of exploration, but maybe I'll put some of that emotion in there. It's not as if there is an emotion inside of me that I need to communicate through my music, but maybe there is the music, rather than stemming from something that already exists and I want to do something similar, that it stems from a story that I want to tell, and then that the skills and the means I have to tell that story may borrow from lots of different types of music and may not be borrowing from any particular music at all. Anyway, I shall stop my rant now. Thank you so much for listening. I also would just want to talk a little bit more about this sample pack that I have released. If you have been following my channel, you may be aware of that I've done this a few years in a row now, but if you're new to it, today I'm releasing a whole library that I've made throughout the year. It is 3.3 gigabytes worth of samples. You can use them to your leisure. They're all made by me. There are loops, loads of one-shots. I've used hardware synths, software effects, hardware effects, all sorts to create these. Also, you will, if you sign up to my Patreon, you will get access to the previous ones as well. I don't know how much it adds up to now, but it must be well over 20 gigabytes of sample content, especially if you're looking for things that sound synthetic and percussive, perfect for IDM and glitch. And as there is so much content in there, I don't think you need to worry that someone is going to spot the samples that everyone else is using. And also it depends on how you use them. You can see in a lot of my previous videos how I've used those sample libraries. I'm going to start making a new sample library next year, so hopefully before Christmas there will be another sample library where I've taken it a step further, or maybe in a different direction. Anyway, please check out my Patreon, and thank you for everyone who has stuck with me even though I haven't been posting for a while. I don't know what the posting frequency will be in the future. I just need to work out how I am best going to document my journey, which I would like to feature a lot more hardware, but I just don't know what the content is and how I'm going to present it. Maybe the Christmas break will help me with this, but thank you so much for your support and have a good festive season. Thank you very much. Goodbye from the fellow passenger.